Welcome to Containerized Conversations, where we try to containerize our conversation. I'm Jessica Caffarelli.
And I'm Josh Warhurst. Thanks for tuning in as we dive into some of our favorite topics, one containerized thought at a time.
Well, welcome back, listeners. We are on our first habit this week. If you need a reminder, the pages for this habit in the latest edition of the 7 Habits that also has Sean Covey edits to it, we are on page 74 to 107, habit 1. So that's what this episode will be about. If you haven't read it or listened to it, I would say listen to it first before watching this episode. There will be spoilers. And we'll talk about what we think about the habit 1. So Josh, habit 1, be proactive. Thoughts?
Yeah, so this is the first habit, like the first actual habit. And I know he kind of went, the previous chapters we talked about like what he considers a habit, but basically this habit is about how you should be able to decide who you want to be, right? I think in the simplest terms, there's a question of like, who are we? Are we our genetics? Are we the DNA that goes into us? Are we our parents? Are we the situation we grew up with? Are we defined by the situations that are happening all around us in the present day?
Yeah.
And the whole part about being proactive is saying, hey, none of that should matter. You're you. You should decide. It's not events. It's not things that are happening to you. It's how we respond to them. I think that's the high level takeaway here.
Is it this? I'm pretty sure it's this chapter where he introduces the response able. Like we are able to choose our response to things. On page 78, there's actually, or 79, there's like a really good diagram that kind of shows exactly what you're talking about. It's it has the stimulus arrow going in, and then you have the freedom to choose, and then your response.
Right. And this is actually a response to page 76, where there's a simple idea that says, hey, there's a stimulus that comes in and then a response that comes out, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is the basic sort of scientific way of looking at something, right? Where you say, hey, if I hit this ball with a bat, it's going to go in that direction, right? There's no choice for the ball. And instead it's saying, hey, you know what? No. When it comes to humans, we have the choice of what our response is going to be.
Yeah. And so then he introduces proactive and reactive. And I actually think the ending of the last chapter, I still think that it does a perfect job of almost describing like a reactive person, because it's such a ridiculous definition. It's such an extreme definition, but it highlights the exact opposite of proactive people. That's a reactive person. Now, I love this chapter because I feel like I read it, I think back to the times where I was probably more reactive than I've wanted to be. And I think he goes into this in the chapter too, where he talks about how a lot of times we will get upset with how we responded, even subconsciously. And I feel like there are some times when I react really poorly to situations, and then I'll get even more angry about the situation. But I think subconsciously I'm actually getting upset by my reaction to the situation. It almost spirals out of control, because then you're like, well, no, I'm not mad at me, I'm mad at them. And then it just like becomes this endless cycle. And you're like, looking back on it now, I thought I was in the right. I thought someone else was making me feel that way, but I was spiraling down the reactionary pipeline. That's what's so crazy about being reactive. I do feel like once you start being reactive, it breeds reactions. Like reactivity just brings more reactionary measures. And so you end up going down this like spiral staircase of reactions.
Yeah, you could call it a trained habit.
Yeah.
Where there's a lot of people that, we live in a world where there are definitely consequences to actions.
Yeah.
If you're a jerk to other people, you should expect that they're going to be a jerk to you.
Yeah.
If you're nice to other people, they might be nice to you, but it's not necessarily one-to-one that your behavior necessarily elicits a certain reaction out of people, because there's also history, right? You might be nice to somebody, but if you've been mean to them the last 5 times, it doesn't matter, right? Like there's a built-in response there. But theoretically, you could talk to someone, be mean to them 5 times, and they might be nice to you every single time, because they might do their best to say, hey, it doesn't matter how you're talking to me. I'm going to interpret this however I should interpret it. It's all based on my response. And I do think, listening to these habits, I think he brings up some extreme examples. I think there's a way that you could take this to say, well, is anybody really suffering except for the suffering that they cause themselves? Like, no, obviously
Yeah.
there's some line that we're walking here.
Yeah.
But, if suffering is happening to you, that thing still exists. But you also have your response. You have your ability to control an element, not everything. If you're starving and there's no food, there's not that much you can do about that situation, but you might be able to go and say, you know what? I'll do my best to control what I can control, which is my own mind. I do think some of this is actually borders on impossible. It's aspirational. There is a part of the brain that literally, if you're, for instance, with hunger, if you're depriving it of food, you don't have the nutrients to do certain activities.
Mm. What I would say to that, though, is like, it is all up to you on how you take it. I think when I first read it, I felt that way, where it's like, okay, yeah, but not everything can be controlled. That's idealist thinking. But as I have tried to follow this habit more and more throughout my life, I am starting to realize I have more control than I thought I did originally. And so that would be
Yes.
my rebuttal to you, is like, for sure, it feels like it. It feels like there are certain situations where you don't have any control. But the thing you just have to realize is you do control how you feel from that situation. And that feeling that you have constructs your perception. And so if you can control how you respond to it, you are also controlling your perception of it, which is changing reality. It sounds like a crazy idea, but you are physically changing your own reality by making yourself think differently. And it's not going to be instantaneous, and it's not going to be overnight. For sure, you have all the right to say, not everything's my fault, not everything's in my control. There will be some times when it doesn't, but I have found, as I've walked away from situations, I'll re-look back at them and go, did I actually not have any control in that situation? And I realized, like, there was probably some things I could have done to, better respond to those situations, which would have then put me in a happier mood, which then makes me realize, like, oh, well, then if I was in a happier mood, then this wouldn't have happened, and then this wouldn't happen, and I would have seen it differently, right? So I don't know. That's my argument.
No, no. I mean, the fact is, I think a lot of people, especially in those situations where they're getting beaten down by somebody, right? They're very frustrated. They can feel like the things that are making my life worse are out of my control. And I think just the act of saying, you know what, how I am responding to this is within my control, and therefore I can respond however I want. Whether or not it's true, and I'm probably more aligned with you on this. Whether or not it's true, like, it is something that you have control over, and I think that is very powerful.
Well, and I would say, go into some of these situations where you think you don't have any control because it is someone else's fault, and there's just nothing you could have done to react differently. Still play it out the same way, but then afterwards, once you've cooled down a day, a month later, think back to it and think to yourself, hey, is there possibly a different approach I could have done? And it's super powerful. I do this a lot, where I'll review the day in my head. I don't know. Do you do that, Josh?
No, everything happens in the past that's gone, right? Like, I don't reflect, Jesse.
No, but like, I'll literally sit in bed before I go to sleep, and I'll like replay like harsh moments that happened to me in the day, and I'll go, is there something I could have done better? And I
Yes.
think it's a really powerful exercise. And sometimes it's okay to say, no, there isn't. It was completely out of my control. But then think back to it a week later, and you might find, well, there might have been some things.
Yeah, and I think from the perspective of trying to improve and trying to have a better response the next time, I think this is a really good exercise. I think you don't want to stay in it too much. The imagination of what could I have done better. I think you should be using this. I think he actually makes this point about how like we actually can't control anything that happened in the past, but we can control what we do in the future. Review it, move on. Like the next situation will be a little bit different. I think it's good to reflect and think on things. But yeah, don't spend too much time doing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now is for the living, right?
When I read this chapter, I was actually having a really bad week. And I do have to say, reading this habit made my week better because I realized I was making myself upset, you know? And I think this one quote hit me so hard. I am what I am today because of the choices I made yesterday. And again, it like hit me in the head. I made those choices yesterday and I am who I am today because of that. And if I'm not happy with who I am today, then how could I have made those choices differently yesterday to better myself today? You know? I don't know.
Yeah,
It was
I
just
would
so
take it
so
like a
crazy.
step in the other direction too, which is how I am today will affect how I am tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons that I sometimes really want to sit down and study and learn new things
Yeah.
because I know that this will be helpful. You know, there are times where today I'll say, "Man, I wish I had this piece of knowledge that I don't currently have." And it's like, well, you know what? I'll always be wishing that until I go and acquire that knowledge.
Yeah.
And so, like, I need to start acquiring that knowledge today so that I don't feel,
Exactly.
perpetually in the state of like not having this knowledge, right? The other concept that's I think comes up in this is the circle of concern and the circle of influence, right? And the idea of there are things in the world that like you can't control, and there are a lot of things that you can control. And the way that you can actually expand your ability to control things in your life is to focus on the places that you can influence, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I actually really like this concept. It's one of the reasons that I am more involved in local government now than I was, say, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And part of it is because I think, when we look at like politics, like things at a national level, there's so many things where people can get really frustrated and they feel like they have zero control over what's happening. And so they just kind of go in this like pit of despair with like things that are like affecting them, but they really can't control it. And I always tell people like go and go to town hall. Go and actually work on the things in your town to make it better
Yeah.
because you actually can have influence. There's not millions of people who live in your town for most people. There's tens of thousands or thousands.
Yeah.
Like I don't know where you live, but
Yeah. I mean, I love that. That's exactly what the difference between reactive and proactive people are. You are highlighting it. Reactive people are, I hate how, on my state or my country is, but there's nothing I can do about it. A proactive person would go and join in on the state, would join in on the politics and help try to change it. That's really
yeah.
good. That's a good example.
And by doing that, you actually feel like you have greater control. And you probably do. If you have influence in your town, you suddenly might have influence in your state. And if you have influence in your state, you might have influence nationally. But I think there
Yeah.
are so many people who get caught in that spell of like I can't do anything, and then
Yeah.
it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and they don't end up doing anything.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. And like I do think being proactive makes you happier. Just naturally makes you happier. As you start being more proactive, you start realizing you have more control, which is just naturally bringing you more happiness. And so the more proactive you are, the happier you are. And
Yeah.
I do find a lot of times that when I'm super upset, it's because I've fallen down that reactionary black hole and I have to dig myself out of it. And then when I do dig myself out of it and catch myself and go, no, be more proactive, stop being less reactive, I do naturally become happier because of it.
Yeah, that's interesting because I also think of like one of my basic life philosophies is that life is chaos. And you could take that to be like, oh, you can't control anything. I do think that there is so much out there, right, that you can't control. That is the result of hundreds of millions of people making small choices that largely impact you, right? And people who don't exist now, right? They're past influences. It's there's so much out there in the chaos. And I think that there's a way to respond to that, which I try to, which is like, well, you know what? That is what it is, right? And I'm not going to lie to myself about the world. I do believe it's chaos. Understanding that, I can go and say, you know, what can I make sense of this? And I thought of that as a reactionary moment originally, being like, well, I'm reacting to the craziness of the world, but I actually think that to your point, I think it is a proactive approach where you're starting to say, okay, most of the world is chaos, but like I can go and make my own sense out of it.
Yeah.
Right.
The back to the circle of influence. What's within your circle of influence or your control? What can you control to change the chaos? Focus on that, and that's what you were mentioning is if you focus on that circle of influence, the things you can control, not only will you be happier and you'll change some things because it will be a lot less chaotic, your circle of influence will grow and you'll be able to change more and more things. And if you believe in the fact that it makes you happier, then that means you'll be even more happier. So one exercise I do a lot actually, and I've done it way more now that we've read this chapter. On page 86, there is like a table and it's reactive language and then proactive language. And this is something that when I first read this habit, this is like an exercise I kind of did myself. And then I actually continued doing it, which was paying attention to the words that I am saying. And then think to myself, is that a reactive statement or is that a proactive statement?
Yeah. I like that table. It's kind of,
Yeah.
it's almost like the 7 habits versus the 7 fake habits or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, and like the exercise that I would always do is like if I would just try to memorize some of these like reactive language bits. There's nothing I can do. I feel like I used to say that a lot. Or I would say something like, well, I'm just doing what I'm told. That's another reactive language. I would specifically pick out things that I know I say all the time. And I would pay attention to when I'm saying that. And then I would think back to, okay, what's the proactive sentence to what I'm just saying? Right. And that was like my first exercise I would do. But then I would actually I would realize it when I'm about to say it, right? Like, oh, yeah, I'm just doing what I'm told. And then I would catch myself as I'm trying to say it. And I would go, I'm choosing to listen to someone else in this specific situation. Right. Or, I disagree with this, but I also don't have confidence I know better. So I'm choosing to listen to this person. I just reformulate what you're saying and say it in a more proactive approach.
Yep. I I want to say there's one part of this that I disagree with slightly
Mm-hmm.
because high level, I think I agree with this, right? Like at least mentally, we should be thinking about what we can do to control our situations and look for those choices, right? And make sure that we're not doing things in a reactive sense. But I will say that the reactive language, the one that I get a little bit, there's like a way of looking at the reactive sentences that I have a habit of doing, which is
Okay.
like I see them in like a slightly positive light. Like a sentence like there's nothing I can do. You can read that with a sense of despair. I can't change anything about this. the one of the ways that I see it is that you can also knock off choices. If you say, you know what, there's nothing I can do over here because arguably it's like out of that circle of influence, right? Now you could say, let's look at our alternatives is a good way of redirecting. And I think it's something that I probably naturally do. But there are times where I say, you know, I can't influence this, but that's fine because I can do something else. I don't have to focus on this situation. And I guess, you know, I sometimes hear myself doing the reactive language, but with this undercurrent of the proactive language. So I think the sort of negative feeling, I think it might be a good way to tell you if you're on the right track. If you're getting frustrated and you're saying things like these, then you might want to be thinking about the language. I would say whenever you're frustrated, think about the language you're using, the way you're framing it, and then
Yeah, I mean
go from there.
that's a really good. I like that. Use your negative feelings as an earmark for possibly being reactive, and start paying attention to what you're saying, what you're thinking, what you're doing, and try to analyze it just, a little bit and say, hey, is what I'm saying, what I'm thinking, what I'm doing, is it reactive? Yeah, I like that. I think that almost makes it easier because you can almost use it as like a, yeah. You ever try to, this is a random side tangent. You ever try to lucid dream before?
My gosh. So I had a friend who was really into lucid dreaming. He was like, "Oh, you got to drink orange juice before you go to bed," right?
Yeah.
He had
Yeah.
like all these strategies for doing it.
Yeah. Well, but that's it, right? It's a marker. You have to have a marker to realize, when you're going to sleep and when you're dreaming,
When
right?
you're
And
actually dreaming. Yeah.
and that's why I really like your strategy, because you're essentially attaching a marker to when you're possibly being reactive. I think that could be a really powerful strategy for people to try to curve away from reactionary thinking and more towards proactive. So I love it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a great strategy.
Sometimes when you're reflecting too at the end of the day, and you said, I had a bad situation. Sometimes when you're right in the middle of that situation, it can be really hard to think straight. I
Yeah.
know that's true for a lot of people. I think the habit that we're trying to focus on is thinking straight in those
Yeah.
bad situations.
Yeah.
Thinking that, you know what, I actually have control over what's going on right now.
Yeah.
Even though I feel like maybe it's out of my control, I
Yeah.
actually do have some control here. That's really good. But with the benefit of hindsight, when you talked about at the end of the day, looking at what you did, I think that's a really good time to go and say, what could I have done?
Yeah.
Right? Was there another approach? Was there a better way? Why did I keep fighting a situation when I could have just done something else?
Yeah.
Right? I think sometimes in that exact moment, if you can, right? I think that requires a level of fortitude that by the time you're done with this book, I'm sure you'll have, right? Or you'll be working towards. But it requires some level of skill to recognize it in the moment. But at the very least, when you recognize it, later that day or the next day, that'll help for the next time so that you actually eventually will recognize it in the moment and then control how you respond.
The thing to keep in mind too with these, different habits is you don't need to be doing them perfectly, but
Hmm.
the keep in mind that these first three habits that we go through, that's what transitions you from the dependent person to an independent person. And I think that's like the huge aim for this is just figuring out how to be less dependent, right? And so we can see now with habit one, it's very clear. This is kind of teaching you how to be less dependent on people emotionally, right? Not allowing them to control how you think, what you do. You control it. And starting to be proactive is the first step from moving away from that idea of being a dependent person. Definitely something to think about, as you work through these different habits. So, my question to you, Josh, are you a proactive person or a reactive person?
Jesse, how could you dare? How dare you ask me a question like that? Oh, I'm so frustrated that you would do that. What was the
Nice.
question? I'm so frustrated now. I can't even think about it.
Nice,
Um,
nice, nice.
No, I think like all these habits, and I haven't gotten to habit 7 yet, but I think this is one of those things that we are, you know, we want to try to improve, right?
Yeah.
We want to see the situations where we don't react. I like to think I'm proactive, but one of the things that he brings up is like the weather. And man, rainy days affect me, right? They really bring me down, and I know that like that's a very reactive language.
Yeah.
The proactive version of that is that often on rainy days, like I will try to take vitamins. And the fact is, I know that that helps.
Yeah.
I have tried totally getting through it with mental affirmations,
Yeah.
and I'd like to be better. It's one of the areas that out of this whole thing I struggle the most with.
Yeah.
Um, is maintaining positivity and focusing on what I can do during rainy days.
Yeah.
But we all have the areas that we're struggling with, and I think we'd like to be better.
Yeah.
But in general, I'd like to think. I'd like to think. I really can't know until other people comment on it, but I'd like to think that I tend to look at what I can control in situations, and I guess that would make me a proactive person.
I mean, if it makes you feel any better, I think you're more proactive than reactive for sure.
How about you? How do you think of yourself?
I definitely think I have a lot of proactive tendencies. Like I said, I still catch myself being reactive sometimes. And, I have to be careful not to fall down the reactionary ladder. I think the big thing that I do that I think is really important is just looking back when I am more reactive and go, I could have been better then. That's the big point that I think everyone should know is like, it's not a big deal if you slip up because I do it all the time. But I think the more important part that you should get is to know when to be introspective and review yourself, I think if anything, that's the biggest thing. And that's why I love this book. The book makes starts making you be more introspective, which I think we can all benefit from, you know?
I think the funny thing about being a parent is that by nature, I think a lot of parenting is reactive
Mm,
as a basis, right? You're learning all these new things. It's easier to be proactive when you've seen a situation like 20 times before,
yeah.
right? And to say, you know what, I've thought about this and I've thought about the alternatives and we can move on from here. When you see your child for the first time, like pick up food from their plate and start throwing it aggressively at the floor,
Yeah.
there's a part of you that says, okay. Like the proactive part of me says, like, what should I be doing differently? Like,
Yeah.
should I communicate that this is a bad habit? Right? I am trying to think of like, what do I do? But there's a little bit of me that's like getting frustrated because I
Yeah.
know the reactive part, knowing that this is like bad, kind of quote unquote bad behavior. But the more like I'm gonna have to clean this up,
Yeah. I mean,
you know, and I
yeah,
can't put that on
talk
other
about
people.
talk about being reactive. I definitely hear you on that. When my kid throws her plate off of the high chair because she's all done, and I'm just like, "Grr, don't get angry."
Yeah. And occasionally I've been the opposite. I've been reactive in a, I don't know, reactive in a positive way. Like my daughter used to do this thing where she would look you straight in the eyes when she has water in her mouth and just spit out the water. And it was really funny. I didn't want to encourage the habit, right? I know we're getting into like begin with the end in mind, but like I knew that this was something that she probably shouldn't be doing, and I didn't want to encourage her doing this. But man, it was so funny that I couldn't help myself from laughing the first like dozen
Yeah.
times.
I mean
And
that
then
and that
later
and
I
that's an example of even though it's a positive emotion, it's still not good.
Right.
Because like you
Right.
said, you're enabling bad behavior that you may or may not want, even though it's funny.
Yeah.
I've
And
definitely had that happen too.
that probably gets into like habit number 2, but that's
Yeah.
next week.
And that's a good place to leave off. So thank you for giving us some spoilers of next week, Josh.
Sounds good.
Listeners at home, please tune in next week where we start off on 110 to 166, which is the
Big
second
chapter.
habit. Begin with the end in mind. So if you haven't read it yet, catch up before you listen to the next episode, and then join us as we deep dive into beginning with the end in mind. And that was our containerized conversation. I'm Jesse Caffarelli.
I'm Josh Warhurst. Have a great night.